A hilltop with stones sticking out of the dirt after a flood gave the impression that it was nothing more than that. There was a sense of order to the pattern, though. It was as if someone from thousands of years ago had intended for us to notice and investigate it. It was deliberate and put there. Upon completion, we discovered anything other than a body or a typical tomb. It remained unoccupied, yet not forgotten. The true enigma starts there. Please hit the subscribe button if you're interested in the mysterious and old before we reveal this weird find. With a light tap on the like button, this trip can go on with its help. Embark on a journey to the places where the whispers of the wind carry more weight than any skeleton can. An old skull was unearthed in a peaceful woodland area of Belgium, buried under layers of silt and glacial sediment by the woman from the ground of all time. The location was neither a tomb nor a man-made burial ground. Rather, it was in a natural depression bordered by stones that didn't quite fit the surrounding terrain. At one point, this very spot was covered with frozen ground, transformed into marshes, enclosing her for millennia, substantiated only by the skull. There is only one skull, no other artifacts, jewelry, or tools. Still, it cast doubt on our previous assumptions of Mesolithic Europeans. The group responsible for its discovery was doing a standard geological survey and was in no way involved in an archaeological dig. They found what appeared to be a piece of ancient bone while charting the change from ice period terrains to post-glacial soil alterations. However, the question of what they found was very complete. A human skull lay motionless in the mud, its jaw missing but otherwise in good condition, as if the passage of time had ignored it. Following further analysis, carbon dating put the woman's demise at around the year 10,000 B.C. Being one of the first modern humans to inhabit the area following the Ice Age, she would have been an amazing find. Researchers were shocked by more than simply the skull's age. Even after geneticists got involved, her bones continued to tell the tale. DNA has drawn from a most dense region of the skull, which is located behind the ear, the petrous bone. It's a rare spot where ancient DNA can be preserved for millennia. The findings rocked the very core of the European family tree. Even though she had pale skin, blue eyes, and what might have been dark brown hair, her DNA contained features that had only been observed in much later populations. She didn't look like the stereotypical dark-skinned, eyed, Neolithic European. In her DNA, there was an anomaly in genetics, a specter from an overwritten family tree. Researchers began referring to her as the Woman of Meuse, once word of her discovery spread. This was in honor of the river valley in which her bones were discovered. The more they dug, though, the more questions there were. For what reason was her cranium positioned in such a way? It looked somewhat like a prehistoric halo, with some of the stones arranged in an oval pattern all around it. Although thorough scans were conducted, no additional skeletal remains could be located. Could that have been a ceremony? Were you honoring her, sacrificing her, or kept safe? Where did she originate from if her DNA was not found in other modern populations? Had a different immigration wave made it to Europe than what we had imagined? Is it possible that she belonged to a small, now extinct group that existed for a short time before dissipating without a trace? The skull was only the beginning of the enigma. The crew kept going back to the spot for a long time following the find. Their goal was to create a topographical map of the area using GPR and soil analysis. The year 10,000 B.C., the location they discovered was ideal for a secluded burial or ceremonial, since it was a swampy clearing with an island of solid ground encircled by swamps. Some have speculated that this location may have had religious significance, a realm where the two extremes, land and ocean, as well as life and death, meet. Rare as they were, artifacts were nevertheless present. The find site also included a shattered flint blade. The distance was too far to establish a direct connection to her, but it was consistent with the tool-making practices of herds in the north at the time. As one continues along the former marsh line, charcoal and charred wood fragments pointed to campfires or ritual fires. The evidence was all circumstantial, but it was mounting to the point where it seemed like more than just a funeral. It seemed like a message But whose message was it? Peering into the recreated face of a person who lived 10,000 years ago is eerily familiar. She regained her face after a digital scan of her skull, and calculation of the depths of her facial tissues allowed for the gradual layering of characteristics. Her forehead was little, her snout long and erect, her mouth kind but expansive. The eyes stood out the most, being big and featuring pale blue irises that had been digitally tinted. She had finally emerged from her lengthy life as more than just a set of bones. She was a real person, a lady who endured a harsh environment that we still don't fully comprehend. And the mystery only grows from there. She belonged to what tribe? Were other humans or climate change responsible for their extinction? On the other hand, did they just blend in with the crowd? Their distinct traits, diluted into the tides of time. The DNA from her skull showed a blend of traits, some from ancient Western hunter-gatherers, some unknown, a lineage not yet mapped. Her presence doesn't just complicate the tree of human ancestry. It opens the door to the idea that entire groups of people, entire cultures may have existed in the margins of prehistory only to vanish before leaving behind pottery, tools, or records. All we get is a single bone in the mud. And yet, we still hear her. The scientific world continues to debate her origins. Some believe her group came up through a forgotten migration route, perhaps following coastal lines now lost beneath the sea. Others think she might have been the last of an earlier wave of humans left behind as new groups moved in. Some wonder if this isn't even a burial at all, but a deliberate offering. Could it be that 10,000 years ago, humans already had myths? Stories passed orally from one camp to the next? If so, what role did this woman play in them? A healer? A leader? A seer, or just someone loved deeply enough to be buried with care? No definitive answers exist. Just that skull, just that face, just that unsettling certainty that history, as we know, is incomplete. Somewhere in that Belgian soil, her people once walked, laughed, hunted, watched the stars, and lit fires at night, and now only she remains. A silent witness, a quiet messenger. And maybe that's why this discovery haunts the minds of those who study her. It's not that she was different. It's that she shouldn't exist. Not according to the stories we've been told about who lived where and when, but she did. And her bones remembered what our histories forgot. So tonight, as the world sleeps, remember her not as a fossil or a headline, but as a human being who once stood beneath ancient skies, just like we do now. And maybe in the stillness, if you close your eyes, you'll see her, too, watching, wondering, waiting to be remembered again. Hundreds of Greek statues found in a 2,700-year-old Crete temple, in the dry, golden soil of the island of Cyprus, beneath layers of time and centuries of silence, something waited. Just outside the modern town of Nicosia, a quiet excavation began in 2018. Routine at first, nothing unusual. A patch of land cleared, ground scraped away by hand. Slowly, carefully, a few pottery shards at first, some discolored stone, then more, and then something else entirely. One statue, then another, and then dozens more statues, some large, some small, intact, broken, faces frozen in calm, blank expressions. Hundreds of them, packed into the layers of an ancient temple. Rows of limestone figures, terracotta figurines, and eerie humanoid shapes, all resting as if placed gently by unseen hands long ago. Archaeologists were stunned. This wasn't a burial site. It wasn't a home. It was a sanctuary, a sacred space used continuously for centuries. First in the early Iron Age, then into the Archaic period. And within it, more than 500 statues, most dated to roughly 700 BCE, had survived the crush of time. But why? So many? Why here? And why have they been buried? Cyprus sits at the crossroads of civilizations. Greek, Phoenician, Egyptian, Assyrian all passed through its harbors and hills. Trade routes crossed the island like veins, pumping culture, stories, and beliefs into the island's core. It was both a gateway and a mystery. And yet, this temple seemed unusually Greek. Many of the statues bore typical Hellenic features. Almond-shaped eyes, strong noses, stylized beards, warriors, priests, children, even animals. Some stood tall and proud, while others were crude and small. Some had smiles, others looked solemn. The larger one stood as high as life itself, carved from limestone, weathered, but still expressive. One figure, more than a meter high, stared out with blank eyes, his arms pressed stiffly to his sides. He wore a helmet. Another, more delicate, held what looked like a musical instrument or ritual object. Each statue felt individual, like it had once meant something, meant someone. But what could have compelled the people of that time, nearly 2,700 years ago, to carve and leave behind so many stone guardians, and even stranger to bury them all? Some scholars believe the statues were offerings, votive gifts made by pilgrims or worshippers seeking protection, fertility, healing, or favor from the gods. The temple, likely dedicated to a deity whose name we no longer know, may have been a center of cult activity. And in such a place, gifts to the divine were a form of currency, a whisper between mortals and the divine, but hundreds. Could a small sanctuary in the quiet countryside have been so important? Or is something else happening here? Another theory proposes that the statues weren't buried intentionally at first, but that a great collapse, perhaps an earthquake or sudden flood, buried the sanctuary in one catastrophic moment. But the layout seemed too careful, too deliberate. Many of the statues were placed in rows or stacked gently atop one another. Some even faced the same direction. If this was destruction, it was strangely organized. So perhaps the temple was being decommissioned, shut down, abandoned with honor. And instead of destroying the idols, the priests and followers gently laid them to rest, burying them like they would bury people, not as trash, but as something sacred like memory. And here's what makes this even more mysterious. Many of these statues were local in style, but others weren't. Some bore design traits found in ancient Greek mainland styles. Others had Phoenician influence, Egyptian too. There was a melting of traditions, warrior figures that looked almost Assyrian, but with Cryot features, offerings with hybrid origins. It's as if this place was more than a local shrine. It may have been a shared temple where multiple cultures brought their gods and their gifts. A spiritual crossroads. And then suddenly it ended. Sometime around the 6th or 5th century BCE, the sanctuary stopped receiving offerings. The statues were laid down. The walls began to crumble, and the temple was forgotten. But the question lingers, why? What caused the end of such a sacred place? There's no written record of a great war or fire in the area. No signs of mass violence. And yet the statues were buried like relics, like precious things that needed to be hidden. Hidden from what? Could it have been a religious shift? Perhaps new rulers with new gods deemed the sanctuary outdated or heretical, and instead of smashing the old ways, the caretakers chose reverence, bearing hundreds of representations of their worship, like laying loved ones to rest. Or could something darker have happened? Some of the figurines had intentionally broken limbs. Others were burned. Was this an act of violence, of cleansing? One small figure, a childlike form with outstretched arms, was found headless, its torso crushed under a larger statue. Coincidence or something symbolic? Even more strange, no written inscriptions were found. Not a single name or dedication. In a region where writing was common, that silence is deafening. Were these offerings anonymous on purpose? Were names forbidden here? Was this a place where only gods knew who had prayed? And as the sun rises each day over the field where the sanctuary once stood, that silence remains. The statues lie now in climate-controlled labs and museums, studied by teams from across Europe, cataloged, measured, photographed, but their voices are gone. They do not tell us who carved them, or who held them, or who whispered prayers before laying them down. They simply stare as if waiting for something or someone. Today, the site where these statues were found is still being explored. Ground-penetrating radar suggests that more chambers remain, still buried, still untouched. The possibility of more statues, more secrets, more evidence of a forgotten past. And yet, the real mystery may never be about quantity. It may be about meaning. What kind of world carves hundreds of faces in stone, gives them to the gods, and then walks away without a word? What kind of people pour their belief into objects only to bury them and leave them in silence? It suggests a spirituality we don't fully understand, one that valued the presence of the sacred in the everyday, one that treated art not as decoration but as ritual, as connection. And when you look at the rows of statues now lined up in museum displays or archaeological reports, you get the sense that they weren't meant to be separated. They weren't meant to be boxed or isolated. They were part of something bigger, a community of stone souls, a whisper of belief frozen in limestone carried across time. And in their silence, they speak to something deep within us, the human need to be remembered, even if only in fragments, even if only in stone. Tutankhamun's meteoric iron dagger, iron from the sky, in the golden glow of Egypt's new kingdom, amid towering monuments and buried secrets. A boy king rose to the throne. His name was Tutankhamun, and while his reign was short, the treasures buried with him have echoed through time with a resonance unlike any other. Among the relics unearthed in his sealed tomb, gilded coffins, intricate amulets, statues, and vessels, there was one object that didn't quite belong. Not in its placement, not in its material, and certainly not in its origin. It was a dagger, a slim blade with a gold hilt, encased in a fine sheath decorated with intricate patterns and floral motifs. But it wasn't its design that startled archaeologists. It was what was made from. This dagger, placed right next to Tutankhamun's mummified body, wasn't crafted from bronze, copper, or even gold. It was forged from a material that, at the time, Egypt did not yet know how to manipulate: iron, and not just any iron, meteoric iron. This blade was not made on Earth, at least not in the way we understand earthly metalwork. It came from the sky. When Howard Carter opened the tomb in 1922, he may not have realized what he'd found. But decades later, as technology advanced, the dagger was placed under rigorous scientific testing. In 2016, researchers using X-ray fluorescent spectroscopy confirmed that the iron in the dagger's blade had a high nickel content, much higher than typical iron found on Earth. The proportions matched those found in meteorites. Think about that for a moment. Around 3,300 years ago, long before the Iron Age had dawned in Egypt, someone had already forged a blade from a fallen star. And the questions began to spiral. Who made it? How did they understand how to work with meteoric metal when they didn't yet smell the iron? Why was this cosmic blade buried with Tutankhamun? And who gave it to him? At that time, iron was considered far more valuable than gold. Gold was everywhere in Egypt, adorning statues, walls, even furniture. But iron, that was divine. That was sky metal. To the ancient Egyptians, the sky was a realm of gods, and anything that came from it was sacred, a material that fell from the heavens, screaming through the night sky as a meteor and crashing into the desert, would not have been seen as just a rock. It would have been interpreted as a message from above, a gift. The blade's craftsmanship also raises serious questions. It's not a rough shard of meteorite. It's a refined, expertly shaped dagger. Smooth, sharp, balanced. Whoever made it wasn't just experimenting. They had skill, and this wasn't the only such item found in ancient Egypt. Several other pieces of meteoric iron jewelry have been discovered, but none as complex or iconic as this dagger. So, where did the blade come from? One theory suggests it was a diplomatic gift. Egypt had strong ties with the Mitanni, Hittites, and other advanced Near Eastern kingdoms. Tablets discovered in Amarna described gifts of iron being exchanged between kings, rare and incredibly prized. It's possible that this blade, long before Tutankhamun's death, had passed through royal hands as a symbol of status or alliance, a cosmic relic handed down across generations until it was laid to rest beside the boy king. And yet, the dagger's existence is still a mystery. There is no record in Egyptian texts of how to work meteoric iron. No workshops, no training, no forges. So, Either the knowledge was lost entirely or it never belonged to Egypt in the first place. What if this wasn't Egyptian craftsmanship at all? What if someone else from outside the Nile Valley understood meteoric iron better? Ancient Anatolia, Mesopotamia, or even further east, cultures that had observed meteors for centuries, maybe even venerated them. Could it be that this dagger was made by a now-forgotten smith who understood that fallen iron could be shaped carefully, precisely, into something both functional and spiritual? And what does that say about the trade? Throughout the time, that in 1323 BCE, a dagger could travel hundreds or even thousands of miles across deserts, over mountains, from one empire to another just to rest in the arms of a deceased pharaoh. It makes us ask how connected the ancient world truly was. Perhaps far more than we realize. But there's something else, something stranger. The meteor that produced the iron in Tutankhamun's dagger likely fell to Earth many centuries before his birth. That means this blade may be older than the boy king himself. Could have had a lineage, a story passed along orally by priests and kings. Was this dagger not just a weapon, but a legacy or even a curse? After all, Tutankhamun's tomb has long been associated with curses, bad luck, and mysterious deaths. The blade of iron from the sky may have been seen not just as a gift, but as a dangerous relic, something powerful, sacred, and possibly unpredictable. In many ancient cultures, meteors were omens, portents of war, disease, or divine anger. Could this dagger have been more than ceremonial? Could it have been a symbol of protection or of doom? The blade itself was found on the right thigh of the mummy, suggesting it held importance beyond decoration. Perhaps it was meant to guard the king in the afterlife. Perhaps it was a talisman, ensuring he could wield divine authority even in death. Or maybe it was simply the most valuable thing they could place beside him, not because of gold or jewels, but because of what it was, metal from the stars. Today, the dagger remains one of the most mysterious items in all of ancient archaeology. It has no parallel, no blueprint, and no true explanation. It stands alone like a fragment of cosmic debris embedded not just in the sands of Egypt, but in the history of humankind itself. And when you look at it, its narrow blade, its perfect polish, you don't just see a tool. You see time folded into metal. You see the sky made solid. You see a story that started beyond our atmosphere and ended in the Valley of the Kings. And somehow, across 3,000 years of silence, you still feel its presence. Not just as a mystery, but as a quiet reminder that sometimes the most powerful truths don't come from the earth. They fall from the stars. The Buddha at the Egyptian port of Banik. Beneath the relentless desert sun along the arid coastline of the Red Sea lies the ancient port city of Banik. Once forgotten, nearly swallowed by time and sand. For centuries, it was nothing more than ruins on the edge of memory, dusted with salt winds and whispers of ancient trade. But in 2023, an unexpected discovery stirred the silence, buried. Deep within this lost seaport, archaeologists uncovered something that didn't belong. A statue, but not an Egyptian one, not Roman, not Greek. It was a Buddha carved in white marble, standing serenely in a port that had never seen a Bodic tree. How did a Buddha statue carved nearly 2,000 years ago end up in an Egyptian city built by the Ptolemies? This is not a modern riddle. This is a bridge between civilizations, a quiet reminder that long before globalization was a word, ideas and beliefs traveled oceans and deserts in silence. Let's step back, slow down, and trace the dusty paths of antiquity that led to this astonishing moment. Baroni was not always so quiet. Around the 3rd century BCE, it thrived under the rule of the Ptolemies, the Greek kings who inherited Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. This was no sleepy fishing village. This was a pulse point in the great artery of trade that linked the Mediterranean with India, Arabia, and East Africa. Silks, pepper, ivory, precious stones, they passed through here like lifeblood. Camels groaned under the weight of spices and texts. Carried from the Red Sea coast to the Nile, and then onward to Alexandria. But what passed silently between the goods were ideas. And in the shadows of crates and scrolls came the story of the Buddha. The statue found at Bereniki is not large. About 71 centimeters tall, carved in Anatolian marble, a lotus blooms beneath the feet. A halo fans out from behind the head. Two vessels, possibly symbolizing abundance, stand on either side. It's not a religious monument placed in a temple. It's an echo, a traveler's memory, a gift, a message sent across continents. Archaeologists believe it dates to the 2nd century CE, during the Roman era, when Baroni was still active. The port then saw more than just sailors and goods. It saw philosophers, healers, traders from India and Arabia, people who spoke in many tongues, but shared a thirst for knowledge, stories, and meaning. This statue may have been created in Alexandria by artisans trained in Greco-Roman styles, but its soul was clearly Eastern. Scholars point to the robes, the elongated earlobes, the serene gaze, all signs that this was more than decoration. This was cultural recognition, and it changes everything we thought we knew about ancient contact between East and West. The discovery didn't come suddenly. Excavations in Barank have been ongoing for years. What the archaeologists from the University of Warsaw and the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism unearthed in 2023 was just the latest piece of an intricate puzzle. Earlier finds included Indian pottery, inscriptions in Sanskrit, and even text written in Tamil. All of it pointing to sustained contact centuries before the age of European colonization. But no artifact was as visually stunning or as quietly powerful as the Buddha. Now imagine the scene. A quiet morning in the Egyptian desert. A tent flapping in the breeze. A small brush slowly revealing marble under dust. At first it looks like any fragment, then the shape of a hand, then the curve of a robe, then impossibly. That peaceful face carved in stone staring softly out over the sands. One of the archaeologists reportedly fell silent when they recognized the sculpture. Not just because it was rare, but because it felt so human, so out of place, so intimate. A figure from across the world, preserved here where the desert meets the sea. And suddenly, Barank wasn't just an ancient ruin anymore. You can almost hear the voices, echoes of merchants arguing over the price of ginger or pearls, or perhaps a Greek sailor asking a Tamil priest about the strange man who gave up his throne and taught compassion. The conversations are long lost, but the statue remains. It tells us this. The ancient world was far more connected than we think, not just through conquest or power, but through curiosity, through shared belief, through quiet awe. And here's where the pacing slows, because now we have to sit with what this truly means. The statue didn't survive because it was important to a king. It wasn't preserved in a great temple. It wasn't sealed in a royal tomb. It endured because someone placed it carefully in a port where the cultures of 3 continents met. It survived because someone thousands of years ago cared about beauty and meaning enough to carry it across oceans and deserts. You can picture that person, can't you? Maybe a merchant, young and hopeful, setting sail from the coast of India. Perhaps he carried spices, pearls, or silk. But tucked in his baggage was this statue, a token from home. Maybe it was a gift. Maybe it was a prayer. Maybe it was meant for someone he loved. We'll never know, but we know it mattered. Today, the statue sits under careful watch, preserved, protected, cataloged, studied. But in many ways, it's not done traveling. Its presence still ripples outward, changing how we see history, how we imagine ancient trade, and how we understand connection. It forces us to let go of the outdated idea that cultures only collided through war. Instead, they mingled gently, often quietly through story and symbol and objects like this one. And as you drift off now, remember this. Buried beneath the dust of ancient cities, there are still messages waiting for us. Silent reminders of how connected we once were, and perhaps how connected we still are. The 2,400-year-old shipwreck found with wine and olive oil jars. The year was 2018, and the Black Sea was calm, at least on the surface. Beneath those still waters, some 2 kilometers down, scientists using remotely operated vehicles scanned the seafloor. They were not hunting treasure or looking for anything in particular. Instead, they were part of a project called the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project, a survey of submerged landscapes and ancient coastlines. What they found, however, was entirely unexpected. They are preserved in an oxygen-free world of cold and darkness, lay a ghost from the past. A Greek merchant ship perfectly intact, untouched for over 2,400 years. To find a shipwreck is rare. To find one from ancient Greece, with its mast still standing, rudders in place, and cargo undisturbed, is almost impossible. Yet this vessel, measuring about 23 meters long, had somehow defied the centuries, buried gently under layers of sediment. It had waded through the rise and fall of empires, through storms and shifting seas to be seen again. The Black Sea has long been known to preserve ancient wood thanks to its unique chemical composition, specifically the lack of oxygen in its lower layers, which keeps away wood-eating organisms. And here, in this eerie, silent world, the ship had become a time capsule. Archaeologists quickly realized they had stumbled upon the oldest known intact shipwreck ever discovered. The design matched that of vessels painted on ancient Greek pottery, ships with curling prows, broad hulls, and tall masts. These were the workhorses of the Mediterranean, carrying oil, wine, grain, and other goods between colonies and city-states. They were symbols of a thriving commercial network that linked Athens, Ionia, and the shores of the Black Sea. But what made this particular ship so extraordinary wasn't just its age. It was the story it told. Imagine the vessel sailing in the 4th century BCE, during a time when Athens was still a powerful force, but the shadows of Macedon were growing longer. A crew of perhaps 15 or 20 men, Greek traders and sailors, journeyed across the stormy Black Sea with a hold full of amphit. The jars were packed with olive oil and red wine, 2 of the most prized commodities of the ancient world. These amphit were their lifeblood, their currency, and their cargo. We can only imagine the days on board. The creak of the wooden planks, the slap of waves against the hull, the scent of salt and oil mixing in the air, sailors chanting as they hauled ropes or trimmed sails, a lookout scanning the horizon for other ships or storms. The tension as they neared unfamiliar coasts or approached foreign ports. Each journey brought profit, but also danger. Then something happened. Perhaps a storm. Perhaps a miscalculation. Maybe the ship simply hit a sandbar or struck rocks near the coast. Whatever the cause, it sank quickly and silently. No sign of panic. No scattered wreckage. No evidence of fire or struggle. It simply disappeared beneath the waves, and there it lay for more than 2 millennia. When archaeologists examined the site, they chose not to raise the vessel. Doing so would risk damage, and there was still much to be learned from the ship in its resting place. Instead, they used 3D photogrammetry and deep-sea scanning to create a detailed digital model of the wreck, allowing researchers around the world to explore it virtually. The A4 themselves were still neatly stacked, their contents sealed away in ancient clay, while some had been damaged slightly. The preservation was remarkable. Chemical analysis hinted at the contents, traces of olive oil, remnants of wine, perhaps even flavors once enjoyed in Athens symposiums or thigh markets. And yet, as fascinating as the physical remains were, the ship raised deeper questions. What was its route? Where had it come from? And where was it going? Was it sailing from the Greek city of Apollonia on the Black Sea coast? Was it headed for trade outposts in modern-day Ukraine or Romania? Could it have been involved in the grain trade that fed the people of Athens? Moreover, who were the men aboard? We may never know their names, their stories, or their fates. No human remains were found, and no inscription survived. But in a way, their legacy lives on in the ship itself. The care in its construction, the precision of its planks, the design of its rudder system, all speak to the knowledge and craftsmanship of its makers. And the ship also gives us a rare glimpse into the economy of the time. This was a period when Greek colonies dotted the Black Sea coastline. Trade was not just a source of wealth. It was a foundation of culture. Goods were exchanged, yes, but so were ideas, languages, stories, and technologies. This merchant vessel was not just a cargo carrier. It was a thread in a vast web that connected peoples and places long before our modern maps drew borders between them. What makes the discovery even more incredible is the silence that surrounds it. There is no grand burial, no temple, no palace, no inscription left to commemorate it. It is not a monument of ambition or war. It is instead a humble survivor, one that simply kept doing its job until it could do it no longer. In a world obsessed with pharaohs and emperors, with stone temples and towering statues, this wooden ship reminds us of the quiet power of the ordinary, of daily work, of trade, of travel, of the people who never ruled kingdoms but made them possible. And now, as scientists and historians continue to study its structure, its cargo, and its context, they hope to unlock more about ancient maritime technology. Already this ship has taught them new things about hull construction, sail design, and rudder use in ancient Greek engineering. But perhaps the most profound gift of the shipwreck is its stillness. It sits beneath the sea, untouched and unseen, in the eternal dark, a reminder that history is not always buried in stone or written in ink. Sometimes it floats quietly, waiting to be found. Sometimes the most remarkable chapters of human history rest not in the grandiose or the epic, but in the faint traces of a journey cut short. And as we imagine that final voyage of oars dipping into the sea, of amphors swaying in the hold, of voices calling over the waves, we feel for a moment the echo of a forgotten world, still sealed in silence, still whole, still sailing, at least in memory. Tomb of a leopard priest found near Saqqara. It was just beyond the edge of the known, in a part of Egypt already steeped in forgotten rituals, lost dynasties, and half-bead secrets. A team of Egyptian archaeologists working near Saqqara made a stunning discovery, one that glowed with color, mystery, and spiritual symbolism. What they uncovered wasn't just a tomb. It was a passage of vision, a space still alive with the voice of a man who died more than 4,000 years ago. At the heart of it all, a leopard skin robe painted in vivid pigment on the wall of a limestone chamber. It was the attire of a priest, and not just any priest, but one who stood at the threshold between the living and the dead. A man who thousands of years ago may have guided souls from this world into the next. His name was Wadi, and though his bones may have crumbled to dust, the tomb he left behind told a story so rich, so ceremonial that it left even seasoned archaeologists speechless. Let's go back to December 2018. A sand-covered shaft was opened not far from the step pyramid of Djaqir, perhaps Egypt's most ancient major monument. Saqqara is vast, mysterious, and still far from fully excavated. Over the decades, tombs have been uncovered here from nearly every dynasty, yet nothing quite like this. The tomb of Wadi dates to Egypt's 5th dynasty more than 4,400 years ago during the reign of Pharaoh Nephra. Unlike the monumental grandeur of kings, this was a priest's tomb. Yet, it was crafted with an intensity of detail that spoke to his power, his wealth, or perhaps something deeper, his connection to the sacred. The limestone walls glowed with color even after millennia. The chamber, roughly 10 m long and 3 m wide, contained 5 burial shafts, some sealed, others broken into over the centuries. But the real magic was not what was underfoot. It was what surrounded the tomb. Painted scenes rich in ochre, blue, red, black, and green. Not faded outlines, but full murals. Walls alive with daily life and sacred rites. Fishermen casting nets, cattle being herded, offerings brought to shrines, bakers making bread, artisans chiseling stone, and then there he was, Watai, painted larger than life in some scenes, walking among the living in, others standing in sacred rites. And then on one wall, Watai wearing a robe made of leopard skin. It is no mere decoration. In ancient Egyptian tradition, leopard skin was sacred. It symbolized divine protection and spiritual authority. To wear was to step into a cosmic role, usually as a Sem priest, someone who performed purification rituals and honorary rites. It was the Sem priest who spoke the sacred words during the opening of the mouth ceremony, a rite intended to restore the senses of the dead so they could breathe, see, hear, and eat in the afterlife. In other words, Watai's job may have been to help the dead become whole again. And now, millennia later, his tomb seems to return the favor. It brings him back to us, his face painted with delicate lines, his family members, his wife were at Pa, and their children surrounding him. Their names are carved with care, their lives preserved in color and stone. What struck archaeologists most was the completeness of the art. So often tombs are pillaged, paint is gone, names chipped away. But here, in a dry-sealed shaft untouched by grave robbers, Watai's world remained. They found statues too, some small carved from wood, others larger, shaped from limestone. One in particular, tucked in a niche, showed Watai seated on a high-backed chair, wearing a calm expression, his hands laid flat on his knees. It's a posture of authority, one that says, "I know where I stand." Even in death, further excavation led to the discovery of more than 50 stone coffins, many with hieroglyphic inscriptions, and hundreds of wooden statues. They belonged to the necropolis surrounding Watai's tomb, his extended family, and their community. But his tomb remained the focal point. Researchers believe Watai was of high status. His titles inscribed in hieroglyphs read Royal Purifier, Priest of King Neferkar, and Inspector of the Sacred Boat. These weren't ceremonial fluff. These were roles that tied him to the heart of temple life, and perhaps to the king himself. The Sacred Boat refers to the solar bark, a vessel the god Ra would ride across the sky by day and through the underworld by night. As Inspector of the Sacred Boat, Watai would have overseen key rituals aligning human ceremonies with celestial cycles. There is one more layer to this story, and it's far from comforting. When the burial shafts were opened, archaeologists found something they didn't expect. Skulls, dozens of them, crammed together, scattered, disordered, and among the bones, signs of disease, evidence of illness in the bone marrow, suggestions of tuberculosis or some long-lost epidemic. These weren't royal burials. These were hurried communal interments, suggesting that perhaps at some point Watai's tomb was repurposed, used during a crisis. A burial place not just for honor, but for survival. It reminds us even sacred space can become a refuge in dark times. Even symbols of spiritual order can be disrupted by chaos. Yet somehow the walls endured. Even with the weight of time and suffering above them, they held on to their meaning. Watai's story remains a whisper from a world where death was not an end, but a transition, where priests wore leopard skin not for fashion, but for passage, where the living prepared the dead, not with fear, but with reverence. In modern times, where stone fades and belief shifts, it's easy to forget the intimacy the ancients had with death. They saw it not as a boundary, but as a bridge, and Watai, the leopard priest, stood on that bridge. Now his tomb is open to science, its colors studied, its geometry mapped, its remains tested, but beneath the data, and report something else remains a moment. Frozen. In pigment, a man with authority, family, ritual, and belief. A priest guiding others, and now being guided himself. If you stood in that tomb today, you would feel it. The quiet, the weight, the presence, and in that stillness, maybe you'd hear what the ancients hoped we'd hear. That no one is truly gone who is remembered. That color survives, even underground, and that some souls, even after 4,000 years, still speak in silence. The forgotten circles of the forest. Hidden beneath the emerald canopy of the Amazon rainforest lies a secret that remained untouched for centuries. Not because it was too deep or too small, but because it was so ancient. The forest had reclaimed it completely. For generations, explorers wandered the Amazon, thinking they were stepping into an untouched wilderness. But beneath the roots and vines, beneath the tangled green of what we thought was pure nature, lay the fingerprints of an ancient civilization. And one of the most striking clues to their presence came in the form of giant geometric patterns cut into the earth. Circles, lines, and ditches, some of them eerily aligned with the sun. Some of them resembled Stonehenge. But this was not England. This was the Brazilian state of Acre. It started quietly in the 1970s when deforestation unexpectedly unveiled strange, circular trenches carved into the soil. Locals initially assumed they were cattle pens or modern human constructions, but archaeologists took a closer look. The trenches were too perfectly formed, their layout too mathematically precise. Satellite imagery later revealed hundreds, maybe thousands of these geometric earthworks, all arranged across the southern edge of the Amazon like pieces of a forgotten blueprint. They stretched across hundreds of kilometers, quietly forming a web of patterns we were never meant to ignore. Some have been overgrown for nearly 2,000 years, but their structure was so deliberate, their symmetry so uncanny, they couldn't possibly be natural. And as researchers began piecing it together, the mystery only deepened. Who built these? Why did they vanish? And why were so many of the circles aligned with celestial events like the summer and winter solstices? The structures have now been dated to between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. That's before the Inca, before the Spanish ever imagined the New World. These were civilizations we never recorded, never wrote about, and never knew existed until the rainforest began disappearing. The more trees came down, the more circles appeared. But what's most striking is not just the size or quantity. It's their purpose. These earthworks weren't settlements. They weren't fortresses. There were no weapons found, no signs of battle, no massive storehouses or palaces. What researchers found instead were ceremonial clues, fragments of pottery, post holes for wooden structures, and sometimes charcoal from fires that burned not out of necessity, but ritual. This has led many to believe these were sacred sites, astronomical calendars used for ceremonies, sky watching, or perhaps something even older, something we no longer have a language to describe. The Stonehenge comparison isn't made lightly, though made of earth, not stone. These Amazonian geoglyphs seem to serve a similar purpose, marking the turning of seasons, the rise and fall of celestial bodies, and perhaps even telling time in a world that didn't have clocks. One of the most mysterious of these sites is the circular enclosure at Fazenda, Colorado. If you look from above, it appears as a massive ring, a perfect circle nearly 100 m in diameter, surrounded by a deep trench and high iron walls. Inside, archaeologists found post holes in a deliberate radial pattern, suggesting a large wooden structure once stood in the center, perhaps a temple or communal gathering space. When ground-penetrating radar was used, it revealed something stranger. Some of these sites were built on top of earlier ones. That means these circles were not single constructions. They were evolving sites used and reused across generations. The builders had a deep understanding of the land. They cleared forest, leveled hills, reshaped soil, and then allowed nature to reclaim the space when their time passed. But here's where it gets even more mysterious. Researchers found that these ancient builders were not the isolated tribes we assumed early Amazonians to be. Instead, they lived in vast, interconnected settlements. Roads connected one circle to another. Raised causeways ran through flood plains, linking geometric structures over incredible distances. Even water reservoirs and canals have been discovered, engineered to manage the rainy season's deluge and keep the ground farmable year-round. This civilization had an understanding of their environment so advanced they could farm the rainforest without destroying it, something we're only now beginning to appreciate. They created what's known today as terra preta, or dark earth, an enriched human-made soil so fertile it can still grow food thousands of years later. But all of this leads us to one central question. If they were so advanced, if they built massive ceremonial structures aligned with the stars, engineered their ecosystem, and lived in dense settlements, why did they vanish? There are no ancient Amazonian texts to guide us. No records, no scrolls, no Rosetta Stones. What we know from the soil, from the shape of the trenches, from the charcoal embedded in clay pots. It's a puzzle with most of the pieces missing. Yet the outline is unmistakable. Some archaeologists believe it was disease. After European contact, even if indirect, diseases could have swept through unexposed populations, wiping out 90% or more of the people in a single generation. The survivors may have scattered. The jungle grew back, and the memory of the builders faded. Others believe it was a collapse from within. The climate may have changed. Resources may have thinned. Political systems, if they had them, may have broken down, and like so many other ancient civilizations, they simply reached a breaking point. Yet still the structures remain silent, echoing the rhythms of stars and solstices no one's watched in centuries. One researcher, after spending a season in Acre, said, "Standing inside the largest of these earthworks felt like standing inside a giant sundial. The way the light filtered through at dusk, the silence of the forest pressing in from all sides, the sense that time was still measured here, even if no one remained to count the hours." Today, fewer than 5% of these geoglyphs have been excavated. Most remain hidden beneath forest and farmland. With every tree cleared, more secrets are exposed, but at a terrible cost. Archaeologists now race against deforestation, not to preserve what remains, but to understand it before it's gone forever. This mystery forces us to rethink our assumptions. The Amazon wasn't a pristine wilderness. It was a human man-managed landscape. The people here weren't primitive nomads. They were astronomers, architects, and environmental engineers. They watched the sky. They read the stars. They carved meaning into the ground. And maybe, just maybe, they left us a message. Not in words, but in circles, patterns, alignments, things that still whisper their meaning if you're quiet. Enough to listen. So, next time you hear the word Stonehenge, remember that the world has many hinges, many centers of knowledge now buried. Some made of stone, others of earth, all waiting to be remembered. And in the shadows of the Amazon, beneath a canopy that hums with insects and rain, a mystery older than most empires still waits for the light to find it again. The papyrus that spoke of a forgotten wife. It was no more than a fragment, barely the size of a business card, faded, worn, frayed at the edges. At first glance, it looked like the kind of artifact that might be glanced over, placed in a drawer, and forgotten for decades. But within this ancient piece of papyrus written in an uneven line of Sahidic Coptic were a few short words that ignited one of the most intense scholarly debates in modern times. It said, Jesus said to them, "My wife," just like that with two words, "my wife." This tiny scrap dated to the 4th century sent ripples through the academic world, the religious community, and even the quiet corners of history where scholars try not to make too many assumptions. But let's slow down. Let's go back to the beginning, to a quiet academic office, to a folded envelope, and a moment that would shake the foundations of what some thought was settled. In 2012, a Harvard Divinity School, a scholar named Dr. Karen L. King received a papyrus fragment from a private collector. It came wrapped in a faded envelope with a brief note claiming it had been acquired decades ago in East Germany. The writing on it was in Coptic, a form of the Egyptian language used by early Christians. And the content, well, the content was unlike anything seen before. Jesus said to them, "My wife." Those words changed everything, and yet the fragment said so little. It was incomplete. Broken lines, partial phrases, fading ink. Still, in a few lines of writing, it included references to Mary, disciples, and possibly a conversation that, if authentic, suggested something almost no traditional Christian text has ever dared to say, that Jesus may have been married. To a sleepy ear, it might sound small, just an old scrap of writing, just a theory. But to the communities that have passed stories down for centuries, and to the scholars who've spent entire careers studying early Christianity, this wasn't just paper. It was a whisper from the past, a murmur that maybe the stories we know are only part of the picture. Dr. King presented the fragment publicly in Rome, and almost instantly, it became known as the Gospel of Jesus' wife. The media storm that followed wasn't unlike the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Gospel of Judas. People were fascinated. Others were furious. But what did the fragment actually say? Only a few broken phrases. Jesus said to them, "My wife, she will be able to be my disciple. I am with her." There was no full narrative, no explanation of who this wife was, just pieces, puzzle fragments without a box to show the picture. The reference to a wife was brief. No name, no context, but enough to challenge the deeply embedded belief that Jesus was unmarried, celibate, divine in ways that precluded such human bonds. The debate that followed wasn't just about the papyrus. It was about the nature of memory, tradition, and truth. Some theologians asked, if Jesus had been married, would it change his teachings? Would it alter his role in Christianity? Others pointed to the early Christian writings that were not included in the official canon, the Gnostic Gospels, the apocryphal texts, many of which portrayed a Jesus more human, more mysterious, and sometimes more cryptic than the one in the New Testament. Was this papyrus a lost piece of one of those texts, a remnant of an early Christian community that had its own version of a story? But as quickly as the conversation flared up, doubt began to settle in. Questions about authenticity surfaced. Scholars began examining the ink, the handwriting, the grammar. Some noticed odd similarities between the lines and a publicly available online Coptic grammar book, raising suspicions that the fragment might not be ancient at all, but a modern forgery. And yet, the papyrus itself, the material, was old. Radioarbon dating placed the fiber somewhere between the 6th and 9th centuries. The ink, though harder to analyze, didn't show obvious signs of fraud. And Dr. King herself was careful. She never claimed it proved Jesus had a wife, only that it showed early Christians, at least some, may have believed he did. That belief alone was fascinating because it opened a quiet window into the diversity of thought in the first few centuries of Christianity. It reminded scholars that history isn't a single story carved in stone. It's a field of overlapping voices, competing narratives, and forgotten communities whose scriptures and ideas didn't make it into the final chapters. For those studying the Nag Hammadi texts, another collection of early Christian writings found in Egypt in the 1940s, this wasn't entirely new. Those texts spoke of divine feminine principles, of hidden teachings of Mary Magdalene, not as a footnote, but as someone central, sometimes even portrayed as Jesus's closest confidant. And here in this mysterious scrap, the word Mary appeared again. We still don't know who wrote it, or when, or why. But maybe that's what makes it so powerful. Because this isn't just a story about a papyrus. It's about how fragile our understanding of the past can be. How one line, one phrase, one forgotten voice from the sands of Egypt can tip centuries of certainty into gentle doubt. And in that doubt, we find something rare. Curiosity. It makes us look again, not with fear, but with wonder. Not asking what this changes, but what more we have yet to discover. As for the fragment, it rests quietly now, not on a cathedral altar, but in a climate-controlled room at Harvard. Its lines are studied, debated, dismissed, and defended. Some call it fake. Others call it forgotten truth. But perhaps the real value of the fragment is not in its certainty, but in its invitation to pause, to listen, to remember that history is always being written, even by those who didn't make it into the final edition. So, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the warm sands of Egypt, a scribe hunched over a piece of papyrus, ink drying slowly, words whispered from one generation to the next. Some remembered, some erased. And then centuries later, a folded envelope, a scholar's curious glance, a world pause for a breath. Jesus said to them, "My wife," whether fiction or faith, truth or forgery, it reminded us how powerful even a few quiet words can be. The nun with lapis lazuli in her teeth. In a quiet German countryside, far from the noise of cities and the crush of time, archaeologists uncovered what looked at first to be an ordinary medieval grave. The burial site belonged to a small monastery that had faded into obscurity centuries ago, tucked near Diem in western Germany. The bones they found were those of a woman buried with no riches, no elaborate markers, no clear sign of who she had been, just another quiet resting place in the cold soil of the Middle Ages. But then something curious, something so small it would have gone unnoticed by nearly anyone else, hidden in the calcified plaque between her teeth, caught in the hardened residue of a life lived centuries ago, was a glimmer of deep blue. Not blue cloth, not blue glass. It was lapis lazuli, the same luminous, almost celestial stone that once came only from the mountains of Afghanistan. The pigment ground from it, ultramarine, was rarer than gold, reserved for the most sacred of manuscripts. It was the color of the heavens in medieval art, used to paint the robes of the Virgin Mary, the edges of illuminated letters, the halos of saints, and now here it was trapped in the teeth of a woman who died more than 1,000 years ago. Her name is lost, her story mostly buried, but that tiny particle told a tale that rewrote what we thought we knew about who made history's most exquisite books and who was allowed to write. This woman wasn't just a passive observer of art and knowledge. She wasn't just tending herbs, preparing meals, or copying someone else's words. She was likely creating beauty with her own hands, illuminating sacred manuscripts with delicate strokes of ultramarine paint. A quiet hidden artist in a world that rarely wrote women into its margins. Let's slow down. Picture it. A cold monastery room. Stone walls, the scent of ink and parchment, a soft flickering light from a high window. And in the center of it all, a woman dressed in simple robes, carefully holding a quill, tracing divine images with pigments ground by hand. The blue she used came from lapis lazuli, a stone so valuable in the 11th and 12th centuries that it was traded across thousands of miles from mines in the mountains of what is now northeast Afghanistan down through Islamic trade routes into the hands of European artists and scribes. Only the most skilled illuminators were trusted with such pigment. It was considered too rare for training, too expensive for mistakes. So how did it end up in her mouth? Scientists studying the tartar on her teeth believe she may have been in the habit of licking the tip of her brush. It was common practice among scribes and painters to bring their brushes to a fine point using their lips or tongue. Over time, microscopic particles from the pigment would become embedded in the hardened plaque. And that is exactly what they found. Lapis lazuli atom by atom preserved like a tiny fossil waiting to be rediscovered nearly a millennium later. This small discovery sparked a quiet revolution in how we view medieval monastic life. For centuries, the history of books, of learning, of illuminated manuscripts has been told as a male story. Men, copying texts in candle-lit scriptoria. Monks with steady hands preserving knowledge. But here in this grave was a different kind of scribe, a woman who didn't leave behind a name, but whose art unknowingly left a trace inside her own body. And that trace was brilliant blue, the color of royalty, the color of heaven, the color of Mary's cloak, a color so rare it was once weighed like currency. Researchers believe the woman was part of a scriptorium that worked on religious texts, likely Gospels or psalters, lavishly decorated for noble or clerical patrons. She must have been highly skilled, possibly among the most trusted artists in her community. Not simply a helper, but a master in her own right. And yet, history nearly forgot her. We only found her again because science took the time to look, to study her teeth, not for disease, but for stories. And in that plaque, something most would throw away. They found a cosmic blue fragment that rewrote what we thought we knew. It was like hearing a whisper from the past, a gentle murmur through the centuries. We were here. We made beauty, too. It's easy to forget that the Middle Ages weren't just filled with battles and bishops and kings. Behind the monasteries, behind the stone walls and dusty libraries, there were people, women, devoting their lives to knowledge, to faith, and to art, not for fame, not for wealth, but because the work itself mattered, because turning a page into something sacred was a kind of worship. And now, as the blue dust of lapis tells its quiet story from between ancient teeth, we can no longer ignore that women were there. not just in kitchens or gardens, but in the sacred halls where light met ink, where pigment met parchment, where the divine was painted by human hands. It's humbling to think of how fragile their legacy was, how easily their stories could vanish. And yet, somehow, a tiny particle endured. We don't know her name. We don't have her face, but we know she touched the sacred. And for a moment long ago, she held the sky in her hands. She painted with heaven's color, the sky mirror codex beneath Sala dewy uni. There are places on this earth that don't feel like part of the earth at all. Places so quiet, so flat, and so endless that standing on them feels like floating inside a dream. One of those places lies in Bolivia, a place where the ground is so perfectly reflective after a rain that the heavens appear to stretch endlessly beneath your feet. This is Sala dewy uni, the world's largest salt flat, a mirror to the sky, and possibly a vault to something far older than human memory. Locals call it the belly of the world. Tourists come and go, laughing, taking surreal photographs where the horizon disappears. But most don't stay long because beneath the beauty of Wuni is something else, something quiet, waiting and long, long buried. It began with a miner. No name, no photo, just a half-torn journal found in a rusted metal box discovered decades later inside a collapsing salt processing station. The entries were disjointed, many water-damaged, but what could be read describes something strange. A discovery made after he followed a long crack that had appeared in the salt crust following a rare winter earthquake. It led to a small depression, one that hadn't been there before. He described it as breathing, like something underground had stirred. He mentioned colors, lights, a humming sound that came from beneath the ground, vibrating through his boots. He said it wasn't natural and that something below the crust was not man-made, but meant to be seen by man. His last entry was dated July 9th, 1932. It simply read, "It opened." He was never seen again. No official excavation has ever occurred. But in the late 1980s, satellite thermal imaging meant to map geothermal activity in Bolivia picked up something odd. Deep beneath Uyuni's southern edge was a heat signature, not like magma or volcanic flow, too rhythmic, too focused like a pulse. For years, it was dismissed. But in 2012, a small, unauthorized team of geophysicists from La Paz returned to the area to follow up. What they found didn't make it into academic papers, but it leaked as whispers do. The group reportedly drilled down near the thermal anomaly. What they hit was not salt or rock, but hollow space, not a cave, a chamber perfectly round and filled with air warmer than the crust above it. One of the scientists, Miguel Andrada, later tried to go public. He only ever got one interview out before he disappeared. In that interview, barely viewed before it was pulled, he said the chamber was lined with something strange. Not metal, not stone, something soft, fleshy. Almost. Embedded in it were discs like huge, petrified shells, each one etched with markings that seemed to shimmer faintly even in total darkness. He said they weren't symbols in any language known to archaeology. But when he looked at them too long, he felt emotions, not thoughts, emotions, grief, longing are like the symbols weren't meant to be read but felt. He called it the sky mirror codex. He said it was not made for us, but we were meant to find it. He also said something else that once. You've been in the chamber, you begin to dream about stars that don't exist. Constellations that aren't in the sky, and a voice always far away, always whispering, saying the same thing. Night after night, you were late. What was the chamber? Who built it? Why beneath a salt flat? One theory is that Sala de Uyuni is not just a salt flat, but a cap, a seal, that whatever lies beneath was not buried by time, but hidden deliberately, and the codex, a warning or a message. The locals still avoid that part of the flats at certain times of year. They say the sky becomes too still, that animals go silent, that watches stop. They say if you sleep there, even just one night, you wake up feeling older, like something has been taken or added. Some claim the CEX was never truly physical, that the markings described in the interview appear only when you believe in them, that it's a test, a measure, like a mirror showing you not what you are, but what you're meant to become. So tonight, when the sky is clear and quiet, and the stars seem close enough to reach, ask yourself, what might still lie beneath our feet? What if the earth remembers everything? And what if someone is still listening? Please, if you're enjoying these slow, strange journeys through our world's hidden past, consider subscribing and leave a comment below about what kind of ancient secrets you think might still be buried. I read them all. Now, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let the ground fall away beneath you, because this was only chapter 1, and we're just getting started. The ice lands of Inuit, in the far northern reaches of Greenland, not far from the settlement of Inuit, the ice moves quietly. It stretches for miles in every direction, white, blinding, silent. Beneath it, the world is still. But sometimes the ice gives something back. Not loudly, not with fanfare, just presents it as if returning a forgotten memory. One such memory surfaced in 2008. A local sled team, navigating near a seasonal crease that had opened along a thinning glacier edge, noticed something protruding just beyond the reach of the snow. A smooth, dark circle. At first, they believed it to be a polished stone, maybe part of an old Viking cache. The Arctic has seen many visitors over the centuries, and the Inuit who discovered it thought little of it at first. But one of them, a man named Akaluk, noticed something strange. The object didn't feel cold. It should have. Everything out there is cold. But this small disc seemed to resist the chill. He kept it in a seal-in pouch and brought it to the local authorities, thinking perhaps it belonged to a lost expedition. It did not. The item was sent to a research facility in Copenhagen. That's when the real questions began. It wasn't stone. It wasn't glass. It wasn't any synthetic material either. The lens, as it came to be called, was made of a completely unknown crystalline compound, completely transparent and perfectly shaped. One side was flat, the other gently curved like an optician's lens. Around the rim, a single spiral groove had been etched so finely that it was invisible to the naked eye. Only under a microscope did it become clear. The spiral wrapped inward with a precision that could only be matched by modern machinery. Yet no marks of tooling, pressure points, or abrasions could be found. It looked grown as if the object had formed organically, like a pearl in a shell or ice growing inward towards center. Curious, researchers began to run tests. They expected it to refract light, perhaps like a magnifying glass, but instead it refracted infrared radiation, heat. They shined a thermal lamp through it, and the heat collected into a sharp beam focused precisely. It could heat a point of wood until it smoked without any visible light at all. It was somehow a lens made not for the eyes, but for the unseen. Instruments confirmed the effect repeatedly, though no one could explain it. Its use remained a mystery. But the strangeness didn't stop there. The ice it had been embedded in was ancient. Carbon dating on moss and trapped organic particles near the lens placed the surrounding material at roughly 12,200 years old. That put squarely in the Viking Age. But glaciologists were skeptical. The lens had emerged from ice thought to be far older, perhaps 10,000 years or more. Ice that predated human settlement in Greenland entirely. The math didn't work. Either the dating was wrong, or the object had moved somehow, transported by the ice, or intentionally placed. Things became more unsettling when lab workers began reporting strange experiences during the study. Technicians complained of vivid dreams after spending time near the lens. The dreams often shared common themes: long tunnels of ice, symbols moving across frozen walls, voices whispering in unfamiliar languages. Some reported waking up with a sense of having traveled. One lab assistant, who had been skeptical of the object's significance, abruptly resigned. He told a friend that he had dreamt of standing on the ice, watching the northern lights ripple above and holding the lens in both hands as if it were a key. He couldn't explain it, only that he felt like he'd seen something meant to be forgotten. The team reached out to Inuit elders in Ulasat, asking if any oral history mentioned an object like the lens. At first, there was nothing, but eventually an elder woman, Anna, shared a story rarely told. It spoke of a sight stone given by the sky to a traveler who could understand ice. The story described a disk cold to the eye, but warm to the hand, used to speak to the night winds. It was not a tale of gods or monsters, but one of warning. The traveler was told never to look through the stone during an aurora. He disobeyed, and he vanished. His dogs returned, pulling an empty sled. Back at the lab, interest in the lens grew. A larger team was assembled to test resonance frequencies, scanning electron microscopy and light diffraction. When subjected to various sound frequencies, the lens began to vibrate, but only at one precise frequency, 132 Hz. A low soft hum, almost like a breath. At that frequency, nearby instruments would flicker and metal surfaces would faintly ring. Still no conclusive answers, only more questions. And then, as quietly as it arrived, the lens disappeared. Not from the ice, from the records. The university that had published preliminary findings issued a quiet retraction. The research team was reassigned. The few images that had made it online vanished. When pressed, officials cited lack of funding, interest, or concrete data, but unofficially, whispers say the object was acquired by a private collector, one with ties to a European energy consortium. Its location remains unknown. Today, the creasse where it was found has sealed shut. Temperatures have dropped again. The dog sled route has shifted. But sometimes on the coldest nights, guides say the ice feels warmer in that spot slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if something once remembered is still remembering. No one can say for certain what the lens was. A tool, a remnant of an earlier intelligence, a message in a medium we cannot yet decipher. Or perhaps it was never meant to be understood, only observed. A single artifact left behind like a breadcrumb in the cold. But the spiral etched into its edge continues to haunt those who studied it. Spirals appear in nature, but not like this, not this perfect, not this precise, and certainly not vibrating at a frequency that makes your skin feel like it's being watched. When you think of Greenland now, try to picture more than snow. Imagine silence so deep it hums. Picture a lens buried for millennia, not by accident, but by design. Something placed there, not for us to find, but because it had to be hidden. Something watching the auroras dance across the sky, not from above, but from below. And if you ever find yourself walking across the Illilasat ice and you feel something warm at your feet where nothing should be, maybe just keep walking, because whatever was sealed beneath that glacier may not be sleeping anymore, and it might be listening the sundial of the endless sands. In the heart of the Libyan desert, where winds whip dust into shifting dunes and the horizon seems to stretch forever, there lies a place the Bedouin call Madr el-Zaman, the Vault of Time. It's not marked on any map, and travelers only speak of it in whispers. They say that at certain hours, the desert itself seems to slow, and the sun no longer burns, it softens. In 2015, an archaeologist from Benghazi named Amamira El-Sharif led an expedition after ancient rock art hinted at something buried beneath the sands. After weeks of digging, the team uncovered a circular stone slab, nearly 4 m across, with grooves carved in perfect concentric circles. At its center rested a metal cylinder embedded, so precisely it looked fused like the dial of an enormous clock. The slab was too big to move, and they chose not to. Instead, they leaned in to observe. At high noon, sunlight hit the slab, and for a moment, it glowed from the grooves outward, like the surface of a pond where a stone landed. But it wasn't heat. It was something else, something reflective and alive. Survey instruments showed no temperature change, no expansion, only the glow. El-Sharif traced the grooves with her fingertip and felt a hum, not audible, just felt in her bones, in her heartbeat. It slowed. The world seemed to expand. The hum continued for nearly 8 minutes, then faded as the sun passed its zenith. Word spread. Meteorologists inspected the site during a heat wave and found the grooves rebounded more strongly when atmospheric pressure rose. It's as if the slab responds not only to the sun, but to the weather, the earth, the moment itself. They took samples from the cylinder. It was metal, but not any metal found in the region. Its alloy contained trace elements needed for modern semiconductors, though it showed no signs of wiring, circuits, or heat damage. It had carved micro-grooves, smaller than any ancient desert craftsman could have made. Laboratory analysis in Cairo timed the groove's resonance frequencies, finding a fundamental tone at exactly 432 Hz, a number not only mathematically precise, but also linked to the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle known to shamans and astronomers in prehistoric times. Meanwhile, village elders shared whispers. This place was once used by keepers of time, a group who understood the desert cycles better than any others. They watched stars, sandstorms, water. They warned outsiders not to disturb what was left behind. During one evening, the team experienced something chilling. The sensor they'd buried near the slab at sunrise picked up seismic pulses, not quake-like but rhythmic low-frequency beats every 273 hours. Every hidden drifting day, sound technicians tried to amplify them. The beat correlated with the human resting heart rate. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, a heartbeat beneath the sand. The team left the site, sealed it, and documented it. But not everyone believed it. Geologists claimed natural erosion shaped the grooves. Physicists said the hum was thermal expansion noise, but none could explain the metal alloy, the heartbeat frequency, or why the glow followed the sun's passage exactly. To this day, no full papers have been published. The site remains off-limits. Travelers report feeling vertigo and stillness, a strange calm. That doesn't rest. Every so often, drones scout the site at sunrise, and sometimes when the camera pans on the slab, the grooves appear to shift ever so slightly, like the rings of a tree embedded in stone. Was the sundial of the endless sands a calendar, a monument, a living instrument, or a time capsule intended not for us, but for something deeper, something that measures us and waits? And if you ever stand on that desert slab at sunrise and listen with your bones, you might feel it too. The vault beneath the Silk Fortress. In the western reaches of China, where the Taklamakan Desert brushes against the ruins of the old Silk Road, there stands a forgotten stone structure known to local records only as the Wind Fortress. The fortress itself is little more than eroded walls, buried courtyards, and shattered towers. But beneath it lies something the world was never meant to see. It was discovered by accident in 1997 when a team of local workers clearing an irrigation trench near the ancient caravan trails hit something solid, flat, and too perfectly aligned to be natural. Beneath the sand, beneath layers of wind-compacted silt, was a sealed stone shaft, and below it, a system of chambers untouched for perhaps 3,000 years. There are no official maps of the vault. Its existence isn't publicly acknowledged, but the documents that do exist, handwritten accounts, smuggled blueprints, photos that never made it to the press, paint a picture of a place stranger than myth. The entry shaft was sealed with interlocking slabs of black and stone, perfectly smooth and bonded without mortar. No inscriptions, no ornamentation, just precision beyond the known capabilities of the region's early dynasties. As the crew descended, light faded almost instantly. The walls absorbed it. Every sound seemed muted. The further they moved, the more the structure defied logic. The vault was laid out like a machine, not a building. Narrow passageways opened into rectangular chambers, each containing identical stone tables, none carved from local rock. Their surface temperature remained steady, unaffected by the freezing cold above or the humid air within. It was as if the stone remembered warmth. And then came the artifacts, not treasures, not royal tomb goods, but things that shouldn't exist. Polished discs with no inscriptions, but perfect concentric grooves. Rectangular containers that emitted a faint vibration when touched. Slender rods fused into the wall itself, made of a copper-silver alloy that doesn't match any local metallurgy of the period. One artifact, a large circular slab mounted into the far wall of the deepest chamber, produced a low hum when approached with metal tools. No switches, no moving parts, just the hum. One researcher recorded their voice next to it. The playback revealed something that wasn't there during the recording. A second voice, slow and rhythmic, speaking in a language that has never been identified. Over time, the team began to experience strange symptoms. Nosebleeds, insomnia, lucid dreams involving geometric shapes, flashing lights, and a tunnel that led ever deeper below the vault. One researcher disappeared after walking alone through the lower chambers. His equipment was found, but he was not. The others left in silence. There were no official reports. The Chinese government cordoned off the area, citing seismic instability, but satellite scans still show the heat signature under the ruins' constant pulsing, not in any known tectonic pattern. There's something active beneath the earth there, something that never powers down. Locals now call the fortress the stone that listens. Elders refuse to walk near it. They say birds will not fly above it. The soil near the trench is unusually magnetic, and plants do not grow. A shepherd once said he dreamed of a city underground where time moved backward and stone walls whispered names that had not been spoken in centuries. No one excavates anymore. But those who pass through the region at night say they sometimes see a faint glow rising from the sand. A glow that flickers and pulses like the breath of something ancient sleeping beneath a desert that has kept its secrets longer than history has memory. And when you lie still tonight with the hum of the world quieting around you, imagine that fortress half erased by time, half awake below the dunes, waiting for someone to listen. Maybe that someone is already on their way. The ones who are buried upside down. There's a stretch of land far from any major city, nestled deep within the arid hills of eastern Anatolia, where the soil seems to remember too much. To a casual traveler, it's just another remote plateau. Windswept, sunbaked, quiet. But scattered across this dry terrain are figures, not statues in a grand sense, not monuments or towering idols. These are smaller, more intimate, human-shaped, carved from volcanic rock, each about the size of a crouched man, and every single one of them is buried face down in the ground. It wasn't always clear they were even there. Locals had known about the stones for centuries, but most thought they were just old boulders or collapsed ruins. It wasn't until the 1990s when a minor seismic survey team ran a series of density scans across the site that the strange pattern emerged. Dozens of stone shapes clustered in deliberate rows, all buried at nearly identical depths, heads down, backs up. At first, archaeologists assumed they were gravestones or perhaps boundary markers for some forgotten village. But when the first of the figures was unearthed fully, the confusion began. These weren't just symbolic markers. They were detailed, carved with surprising precision, and each one was placed into the soil like a body, with the face pressed firmly toward the earth, as though ordered not to see the sky. Who buried them, and why? Excavation was slow. The region's hard clay made digging difficult, and the figures were fragile, volcanic tough, easy to damage with too much pressure. Over time, 31 full figures were uncovered, everyone face down, everyone precisely placed. No inscriptions, no tools, no remains of structures nearby, just the silent watchers deliberately entombed beneath the open sky. It didn't take long for theories to multiply. Some believed it was Arari tradition, that perhaps these were representations of real people, and that being buried face down meant something sacred. Others argued it was a form of punishment, that these weren't honored dead, but outcasts, criminals, those denied the grace of upright burial. But there was one detail that complicated everything. Each statue had no feet, not broken, not eroded, missing, carved that way deliberately. Smooth bases like they were never intended to stand upright. They were made to fall, made to lie. Some researchers began to suspect something darker, that these figures weren't meant to be seen, that they were meant to be hidden, bound to the earth, their faces pressed down as a kind of eternal penance. But the question remained, what could an entire community, perhaps even an entire civilization, fear so much that they'd carved dozens of human forms, only to bury them silently in dirt sightless, and immobilized. And then came the disturbing discovery. One of the excavation teams, working on the northern edge of the site, uncovered a partially exposed figure with something beneath it. At first, they assumed it was another statue, but digging further revealed something stranger. A human jawbone, real, fossilized beneath the carved figure, and deeper still, a full skeleton, curled small, likely a child. The implications shook the team. This wasn't just symbolism. At least one of the figures had been placed as a kind of cover, not merely artistic, but physical, a seal, a weight, a watcher perhaps, or guardian, or maybe a jailer. Suddenly, the question shifted. Were these figures meant to honor the dead or to contain them? More scans were ordered. More figures were uncovered. And beneath 3 others, more bones, all children, no trauma, no obvious cause of death, but no burial rites either, no grave goods, no markers, just stillness and silence. The local legends were no help. They spoke vaguely of a time when the earth had opened up and the spirits had to be held down. Stories of whispering hills and shadows that moved even in sunlight, the kind of tales that get told to frighten children into behaving. But those same stories have been passed down for generations, long before any archaeologist had walked those fields. Some researchers began whispering their own stories, that this was some kind of forgotten cult practice, that the figures represented guilt, that maybe the children were seen as vessels for spirits, for illness, for something else, and that burying the stone bodies over them was a way to trap whatever couldn't be allowed to rise. But even that explanation felt too neat, because not all the figures had bones beneath them. Most were simply buried alone, silent, sightless, their expressions eerily calm. And then there was the final twist. A team using low-frequency ground imaging discovered that the figures were laid out in a pattern, not just in rows, but curved, almost like petals or waves. And at the very center of the pattern, untouched, unexcavated, was a large mound. It looked natural, a hill like any other. But the scan suggested something beneath it, something large, hollow, man-made, a chamber, sealed, undisturbed. As of now, no one has dug into it. The local government refuses permits. The area is considered geologically unstable. But some say it's more than caution, that people are afraid that opening the center might disturb something that's been kept silent for a reason. Whatever the truth is, the upside-down watchers remain, some in museum crates, most still in the ground. Their presence is quiet, almost gentle. But there's something deeply unsettling about the way they lie there. Not broken, not toppled, but placed carefully, intentionally, as if they were meant to witness nothing, or perhaps to make sure something else was never seen again. Because sometimes silence isn't just the absence of sound. Sometimes it's protection, and sometimes it's a warning. The tomb with no bones. In the arid highlands of southern Jordan, a discovery was made that quietly disturbed the rhythm of archaeological certainty. It wasn't a city or a temple, or even a traditional grave. What the researchers found in 2017 was something far stranger, a tomb perfectly sealed, untouched for thousands of years. But when they opened it, they found nothing inside. No bones, no ashes, no human remains at all. And yet everything else was there. It began with a local shepherd who had noticed a set of odd stone patterns on a hillside, exposed after a seasonal flood. The ground had shifted, revealing a cluster of carefully placed stones unlike the natural formations around it. Word got around. Eventually, a team from Amen University was called in to investigate. They expected ruins, maybe an old shrine or collapsed dwelling. What they found instead was a fully intact subterranean structure. A narrow staircase led them down into a chamber shaped like a teardrop. The walls were smooth, finished in pale limestone. The floor was black basalt, and in the center of the room stood a sarcophagus, polished, silent, and untouched. They opened it with care. Inside was a cavity perfectly carved for a body, but no body lay within, no skeleton. But surrounding the empty space were relics, obsidian beads, a ceremonial knife, an ivory comb, and a bronze surlet so delicately crafted it could only have been made by a master artisan. These were burial goods, items reserved for the honored dead. And yet the tomb was silent, as if whoever it was meant for had never arrived or had left long ago. At first the team thought it was a robbed grave, an all-too-common reality. But the seal had never been broken. The air inside the chamber was stale and untouched. Dust lined the room like fine powder, undisturbed. There was no evidence of entry, no claw marks from animals, no insects, no mold. Only one feature stood out, a carved symbol above the sarcophagus, a spiral enclosed in a triangle, unlike anything documented in the region's known cultures. The stone above it was charred ever so slightly, as if it had been scorched with fire or heat of some other kind. Weeks passed. They took scans, samples, 3D renderings. One night, during a thermal survey, something unusual occurred. The sensors recorded a sharp temperature spike inside the sarcophagus just for a moment. Despite the tomb being sealed again, the heat was real, and then it was gone. Some began to question if the tomb was ever meant to hold a body. What if it was never a burial chamber at all? A few fringe researchers suggested it was a containment unit, an ancient vault built to hold not a person, but a presence, something intangible, something not dead, but removed. Others turned to history. There are rare cryptic mentions in Nabatian texts of sleeping vessels used to preserve souls in absence. Hollow tombs meant not for flesh, but for spirit. Could this be one of them? Even stranger, ground-penetrating radar revealed that this wasn't the only chamber. Beneath the first tomb, there were two more layers of sealed rooms, smaller, tighter, and positioned directly beneath the sarcophagus. Excavations were paused after the third day of radar mapping. Funding was quietly pulled. No further. Digs were approved. The tomb was resealed. Locals now refer to it in hushed tones as Cabra Alsif, the Zero Tomb. They say strange dreams come to those who visit the hillside. Dreams of silence, of spirals, of standing before a gate that opens not into darkness, but into stillness, a stillness so total it feels alive. Today, there is no official record of the site. The area has been quietly designated a no-entry zone. Satellite images still show a faint depression in the hill, a subtle mark where something unnatural was once unearthed and where it now sleeps again. Was it a forgotten ritual, a failed burial, a vault for something we're not meant to understand? Or perhaps the tomb was never meant to hold death at all, but to keep it out, the tree that was not a tree. They called it the Still One. That was the name whispered in local legends, passed down through generations in a remote forested stretch of eastern Romania, where the Carpathian Mountains begin to bow into flat land. It didn't move. It didn't grow, but it had always been there. Children were told not to touch it. Elders left offerings near it, and travelers, especially those unfamiliar with the area, were warned, don't sit beneath its branches. Don't stare at it for too long. And whatever you do, don't sleep near it. At first glance, it looked like any other old tree, maybe a bit taller, a bit darker. Its bark was unusually smooth. Its branches reached out like frozen limbs of petrified wood. Even in the spring, no leaves ever bloomed. No animals nested in its trunk. But in a forest of growth and green, it stood out in its stubborn stillness, like something pretending to be a tree, like something that had simply decided to stop changing. In 2023, during a survey of fungal networks in old-growth European forests, a small team of ecologists arrived in the area to study biodiversity. They were equipped with new sensors, drones, soil analyzers, and had no particular goal beyond mapping unseen microbial systems. The tree, the Still One, wasn't even on their list. But then a strange anomaly appeared. Their ground-penetrating radar revealed that this tree had no traditional root system. It extended downward, yes, but not in the branching structure one would expect from an oak or yew. Instead, it went straight down like a column, uninterrupted, narrowing as it reached depths of over 30 m. The roots didn't web or weave. They tunneled like a drill. Even stranger, the core didn't respond to heat the way organic wood should. Thermal imaging showed it emitted a faint cold signature like stone or metal, but the surface appeared wooden. Samples taken from its bark defied identification. It wasn't entirely cellulose. It wasn't plastic either. It had traces of carbon but lacked lignin, the chemical that makes up plant structure. The compound, whatever it was, didn't match any database on Earth. Then came the audio. One of the ecologists, while sitting near the base and recording soil vibration for fungal signals, left their microphone running overnight. When the data was reviewed, a low rhythmic pulse was discovered, almost like a heartbeat. Not mechanical, not seismic organic, but slow. Too slow. Once every 47 seconds, a faint pulsing sound like pressure building and releasing, and then it stopped. When they returned to the site the next evening, the pulse was gone. There was skepticism, of course. Within the broader scientific community, discoveries like this tend to be dismissed until repeatable data is shown. But 2 weeks later, it pulsed again. This time, while the researchers were present, it wasn't just a sound. The ground seemed to shift slightly, almost imperceptibly. Emotion felt more than seen, as if something large had stirred far beneath the surface. The tree remained still, but the feeling spread like a ripple across the soil. One team member described it as a tremor made by something breathing. Another said it felt like the earth was exhaling. They dug deeper, this time with permission from the local forestry board. A narrow shaft was created near the base of the tree to avoid disturbing it. What they found below was even stranger. About 12 meters beneath the surface, they encountered a change in the soil composition. It wasn't dirt anymore. It was ash, compressed, ancient, and tightly packed, as if a massive fire had burned long ago, but only in that one column. Beneath the ash was something else, something hard. They couldn't drill through it. Attempts to take samples failed. Standard diamond bit equipment dulled almost instantly. The substance resisted heat, pressure, even chemical etching. And yet to the touch, it was cool, smooth, almost gentle like bone, but not bone. That's when the hallucinations began. 3 of the researchers began experiencing strange dreams. Not nightmares exactly, more like memories that didn't belong to them. They described enormous dark forests, but alien ones, canopies stretched hundreds of meters high, not trees, but spires. They felt like they were being watched. In the dreams, they were always walking, always towards something, but never arriving. One researcher, Dr. Amelia Sauron, kept a journal. In her last entry before leaving the site, she wrote, "It's not a tree. It's not even pretending to be. We just don't know how to look at it. The shape, it's camouflage. I don't think it wants to hurt us. I think it's waiting. Waiting for what?" She didn't say. Shortly after, she quit the project, vanished from academic circles. Her notes were archived, but several pages were redacted by authorities. No one knows why. Then the wildlife began to disappear. Birds stopped flying overhead. Insects avoided the base entirely. Even moss and fungus retreated. Time-lapse footage revealed something almost too subtle to believe. The surrounding trees began leaning ever so slightly away from the still one, as if they were trying to make space or distance. A drone flight revealed something else. From above, the surrounding forest formed a perfect spiral pattern around the still one. Trees leaning, curving ever so slightly like growth was being guided, pulled. The drone didn't return. Its signal was lost moments after flying directly above the tree. That's when old stories began to resurface. Folktales, whispers from village elders. There were legends of a sentinel in the forest, older than the mountains, deeper than the stone, of being placed there not to guard something, but to contain it. One tale spoke of a rootless god buried beneath the earth who once tried to seed the sky with silence. It was stopped, sealed, and hidden. Its prison masked as a tree so that men would not dig, so that they would pass by without asking questions. Another tale spoke of a tree that wasn't wood, but a finger that points to the end of things. Cryptic, poetic, easy to dismiss until you stood before it, until you listened. Because if you stood near the still one long enough, if the wind died down and your thoughts grew quiet, you'd begin to feel it too. A presence, not loud, not cruel, just watching. Archaeologists from the Romanian Institute of Antiquities arrived later that summer, hoping to classify the object. They ran magnetometry tests, finding magnetic anomalies in a perfect grid pattern around the tree, hundreds of meters wide, too precise to be natural. One visiting physicist from Germany made a bold claim. The pattern resembled a form of signal suppression, almost like the entire area was designed to mute a transmission. But transmission from what? That's when they discovered the second object. Roughly 500 m from the still one, beneath a collapsed hillside, a stone tablet was uncovered, not carved, but molded as if poured and shaped by hand. Its surface bore a single symbol, a spiral of roots coiling inward, forming a perfect eye. Beneath it were 5 words etched in a language that linguists later classified as pre-Indo-European, far older than any known script. It translated roughly to "do not wake what sleeps here." That's when funding was pulled. Within days, Romanian authorities closed the site under the guise of ecological protection. The research team was disbanded. All data was confiscated. Public interest was diverted. Articles were buried. No mention of the still one made it into journals. It was as if the discovery had never happened, but locals still know, and the tree is still there. The mechanism buried in clay. In 2023, on a quiet dig site in northern Iran's Dasht-e-Kavir desert, a team of local archaeologists was excavating what they believed was just another layer of a collapsed mud brick settlement. They had done this kind of work for years, dust, sift, catalog, until their trowels hit something unexpected. It wasn't pottery. It wasn't stone. It gave slightly under pressure, but not like clay. And when they cleared the dirt away, what emerged stopped everyone cold. A small, compact device, no larger than a fist, made of interlocked discs and plates fused into hardened clay. Not sculpted, not symbolic. This thing looked manufactured precisely. So, the artifact was shaped like 2 interlocking gears partially fused together by what looked like ancient heat. But it wasn't metal. It was a dense composite, something like hardened ceramic, but more refined than anything from the surrounding layer, which dated to roughly 5,300 BC. That's over 7,000 years ago. The device had no decoration, no religious markings, and no clear ceremonial use. But it had teeth, gear teeth, small, accurate, evenly spaced, too perfect to be accidental. They ran it through 3D scanning, and that's when things became stranger. The gears were set at offset angles, not in a typical wool mechanism, and there were tiny grooves that suggested it once rotated under pressure, but not with the kind of motion seen in pottery wheels or grinding stones. It was a machine, or part of one from an era where machines shouldn't exist. At first, experts thought it was a hoax, maybe something modern that got mixed into the layer, but radiocarbon dating of the fuse surrounding clay, plus rare plant residue locked in the cracks, confirmed it. This object had been buried for over 7,000 years. There was no context, no written records, no matching artifacts, just this gear thing sitting alone in the desert in a place that predated formal cities. Some compared it to the Antrim mechanism, but that was 2,000 years old in Greek. This was 3 times older and much more primitive in material, yet advanced in design. The local workers who found it began calling it the whisper gear because once during a silent moment of cleaning, one of the interns swore he heard a faint sound when it was turned, like a hollow breath escaping from inside. Paranormal? Probably not. But the idea stuck. Theories flooded in. Some called it a broken tool. Others thought it might have been a timekeeping device, an early attempt at tracking days or moon phases. But that didn't explain the complexity or the complete lack of any similar finds from that region or time. One of the strangest ideas came from a material scientist brought in later. After analyzing the gear under high-res microscopy, he noted something chilling. The grooves were too fine to be carved by stone or copper tools. They resembled where patterns left by vibration, like the object had once been part of something that hummed. No proof, no instructions, no context, just a gear from the wrong century, found in the wrong place. It sits now in a climate-controlled drawer, unexhibited, unnamed, labeled simply Artifact 117 Kavir, function unknown. And sometimes when the wind moves over the desert the right way, you wonder, was it broken or waiting to be turned again? the stone giants beneath our feet. In the hidden corners of our planet, beneath mountains and deserts, buried deep below the land we walk without thought, lie structures that shouldn't exist. Structures too massive, too precise, and too advanced for the civilizations we've been told built them. Across continents and centuries, these megaliths quietly challenge the limits of what ancient humanity was capable of. They sit buried, half forgotten, weathered by time. Yet they remain unmoved, unanswered. In Russia's North Caucasus region, deep within the wilderness of Kabardino-Balkaria, an explorer named Arthur Zhukov once followed a narrow mountain fissure into a secret no one was prepared for. The year was 2011. The mountain was called Kora, and what he uncovered beneath its peak wood challenged the very foundation of history. At first, it appeared to be nothing, a crack in a cliff face. But as Zhukov descended, stone gave way to form. Natural walls turned into straight angles, and the deeper he went, the more impossible it became to explain. He wasn't inside a cave. He was inside something made. Massive geometric slabs lined the shaft walls, some weighing over 200 tons. They were fitted together without mortar. Yet, not even a sheet of paper could slide between them. These weren't the rough, hewn stones of survival era builders. They were engineered, sharp, mathematical, silent. Further inside was a vast underground hall 36 meters high. The stone blocks rose like columns in perfect symmetry, forming corridors that seemed to echo the design of Egypt's Great Pyramid. But this was Russia, far from Egypt, far from anything, and yet so familiar. Narrow passageways split off from the main chamber, some too narrow for even a child to enter. They bent around corners and vanished into dark, unreachable crevices. The walls reflected light like polished black mirrors. The air inside flowed with direction as if the place breathed. A system of internal ventilation. From when? For whom? And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. Zhukov's death in a car accident a few years later left the site untouched. Exploration halted. Questions went unanswered. But the photos and models he captured remain. Images of impossible stonework, of precision architecture sealed beneath a forgotten mountain. And that's just one place. Half a world away, buried beneath the sands of Abydos in Egypt, lies another impossible structure, the Orion. Unlike the ornate temples surrounding it, this one tells no stories. Its walls are bare, no hieroglyphs, no pharaohs, no gods, only weight. Granite blocks cut from quarries 200 m away in Aswan, stacked beneath the desert floor. Some weigh more than 100 tons. But somehow they were brought here, lowered with care, into a chamber 15 foot underground and arranged in a structure that still resists decay. No written record explains why it was built or how. Water fills the chamber, constantly replenished from an unknown source. Modern teams try to pump it out, but couldn't. Seismic scans suggest the structure continues downward far beyond what we can see. The Orion may be far larger than anything exposed to daylight, and what's submerged may be older than the Egypt we know. Stranger still, some visitors claim to feel changed after being near it. Subtle improvements in health, lightheadedness, a lingering clarity. Scientists say the water is unusually warm and mineral-rich. But no one really knows. Some think the site is more than a tomb or temple, that it may have been built to harness forces we no longer understand, if we ever did. And then there's Baalbek. In the fertile Baho Valley of Lebanon, Baalbek rises like a scar in stone. Its most famous structure, the Temple of Jupiter, stands on a platform built from 3 stones unlike any others on Earth. The Trielethon, each one over 1,000 tons, so large they make the great stones of the pyramid seem like bricks by comparison. To this day, no crane, ancient or modern, can fully explain how these stones were moved. Nearby in the quarry lies the stone of the pregnant woman, 50 tons, still embedded in the bedrock. Some say it was too heavy to move and was left behind. But the stone next to it, discovered in 2014, is even larger, 1,650 tons, and it too was abandoned. Who tried to move these? And for what purpose? The temple itself aligns with celestial bodies. The solstice sun, the stars. Its placement and orientation are too exact to be accidental. Some believe Baalbek was a kind of interstellar calendar or an energy map drawn across Earth's surface. Legends say it was built by giants or by gods. The deeper you look, the harder it becomes to laugh off those tales. And then there's the place Herodotus called the most astonishing in all Egypt. A labyrinth so vast and complex it was said to make the pyramids look small. The ancient Hojra pyramid site, once believed to be modest, turns out to hide a core of impossible construction. Gigantic blocks, fitted with surgical precision, passages descending into the earth, sealed by slabs that moved only with great force. Somewhere beneath it, they say, are the remains of the great labyrinth, 3,000 rooms buried and untouched. Today, satellite scans show outlines underground matching the dimensions described in ancient texts. Yet, no excavation is allowed. Why? Nearby at Saqqara, the Serapeum holds even more questions. Dozens of granite sarcophagi, each one carved from a single block, polished until the walls gleam. Each one weighs over 70 tons, and they were dragged into narrow underground tunnels with no room to maneuver. Why, and more importantly, how no pharaohs were found inside. No names, no inscriptions, just silence. Across all these sites, Kora, the Ozeron, Baalbek, Hojra, the Serapeum, a pattern emerges. Structures too massive, too precise, too strange to fit the stories we've been told. Civilizations building with techniques that even now leave us speechless. Alignments with stars, sealed doors we cannot open, stone that seems to obey. Geometry instead of decay. And a question that hangs over them all, growing louder the deeper we dig. Were we really the first? Because if we weren't, then something else walked here before us, and it left its memory written in stone. The stone ship of the Baltic Deep. Beneath the cold, dark waters of the Baltic Sea, off the coast of Sweden and Finland, there lies a structure that doesn't belong. It isn't a sunken vessel from the modern era. It isn't debris from war or an abandoned submarine or even a forgotten cargo ship. No, this object, this anomaly, appears to be older than any of those things. Far older. And its design doesn't quite match anything we understand. It is often referred to as the Baltic Sea anomaly. But to the divers who first encountered it, it felt like something else entirely. It felt ancient, purposeful, alien, and in some strange way alive. The story begins in 2011 when a team of Swedish treasure hunters operating under the name Ocean X set out to explore a region of the Baltic seafloor that had been the subject of rumors and legends for decades. Their mission was fairly straightforward. Search for sunken ships, trace old shipping routes, and perhaps stumble upon a valuable wreck. What they found instead was something no one had predicted. Using sonar scanning equipment, they detected a large object resting 300 feet below the surface. The scan showed a circular formation nearly 200 feet in diameter with strange symmetrical features and straight edges, something not typically found in natural geology. But that wasn't all. Connected to it was what appeared to be a long trench or runway, as if the object had either landed or crashed onto the seafloor and slid into place. The team was stunned, and when they dove down to investigate, they found something that defied logic. The object was stone, but not like the seafloor stone around it. It was smooth, unnaturally shaped. Parts of it resembled stairs. Other parts looked like ramps or platforms. Some even said it resembled the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. But more than its shape, what struck the divers was the feeling, the atmosphere. The water around it was unusually cold, far colder than the surrounding sea. Their electronics malfunctioned. Lights flickered. Cameras died. Communication with the surface cut in and out. It was as if something didn't want to be seen. As they moved closer, they noticed what looked like soot or burn marks across portions of the structure. Some interpreted this as evidence of high heat, like an explosion or possibly propulsion. But if this were a ship, it wasn't like any ship we've ever known. There were no metal parts, no propellers, no rivets, just stone. And yet, it didn't feel natural. Samples brought back to the surface confused geologists. Some rocks contained minerals not native to the area. Some were porous like volcanic lava, but showed signs of having cooled in the absence of air, something that doesn't happen on Earth. And one theory emerged, quiet at first, then louder, that this wasn't a ship that sank. It was a ship that landed or perhaps had been left behind. Skeptics rushed to call a natural formation, glacial deposit, basalt columns, or a trick of the sonar. But the deeper the scans went, the stranger it became. Beneath the surface of the object were cavities, chambers unexplored and silent. And then there were the grooves, deep uniform lines running along the floor nearby, as if whatever this was had once moved under its own power. Some suggested it had skidded to a halt. Others said it had been buried for thousands of years, revealed only now by shifting sands and currents. Local myths added fuel to the fire. Fishermen in the region had long told stories of lights beneath the sea, of strange sounds echoing through the water. Some had refused to fish in that area for generations, calling it cursed or haunted. Divers who returned from the anomaly described vivid dreams, a presence, a sense of being watched, even deep beneath the waves, and most disturbing of all, a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate through the bones, inaudible but unmistakable. As exploration continued, theories multiplied. Some claimed it was the remains of an ancient civilization, sunken long before history began. Others believed it was a ritual site, perhaps even a landing platform for visitors from the sky. A few went further still, calling it a weapon or even a prison, one that had remained sealed until now. One diver years after the expedition claimed in an interview that he had touched the structure, and in that moment, time felt different, slower. He described a sensation like falling without moving. He said he heard a voice, not through his ears, but in his thoughts. It said nothing he understood, just tones and pulses, a pattern, something ancient trying to be remembered. Whatever the truth, no one has been able to fully explain the anomaly. The Swedish government quietly discouraged further exploration. OceanX pulled back. The object still sits at the bottom of the sea, unmoved, unstudied, and some would say undisturbed. But satellites have detected something peculiar. Occasional heat signatures rising from the cold floor. Pulses rhythmic and soft, like a machine left idling in the dark. So what is it? A natural fluke? An ancient artifact? A ship from the stars? Or something else entirely? Something that blurs the lines between machine and monument, past and future, matter and memory. Tonight, as you listen, allow yourself to drift beneath those icy waters. Let the hum of the deep sea carry you. Imagine descending into that cold, silent darkness where sunlight never reaches. Picture the stone circle rising out of the silt, older than any chart, untouched by time. There are places on this earth we were never meant to find. Places where the past still breathes and where forgotten things dream in silence. The Baltic anomaly might be one of them. And if you ever find yourself near those waters, perhaps you'll feel it too. A presence just beneath the waves waiting.